And welcome to the Clarksville-Montgomery County School Board Superintendent interview. Today is Friday, May 6th, and we have Dr. Impeartrice, our fourth and final candidate. This evening's interview will proceed to last an hour and a half, and it's going to consist of questions and answers asked by various members of the board. We request that our candidate, as he answers questions, be concise in his answers. And with that, good evening, Dr. Impeartrice. Are you ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
So we're glad that you are interested in our director of school position. What specifically attracts you to Clarksville and the Clarksville-Montgomery County school system?
Well, really, that attraction started in 2006. So in 2003, I was appointed principal of Freedom Intermediate School and Franklin Special School District in April for the subsequent year. About a month later, we were designated on the No Child Left Behind list. In achievements, we were designated for African Americans in math, not meeting the percent of proficiency. In economically disadvantaged, not meeting achievement proficiency in both math and reading language arts. So the first thing that I did with that appointment, coming from another school in the district, and because I was appointed, is I listened. And did a SWOT analysis with them, asked them what are the strengths of the school, what are the weaknesses or areas for growth, what are opportunities we're not taking advantage of, and then what are threats, things that impact our culture, but we feel we have no control over. Within that first year, we focused on that information. Those were 15-minute meetings with every personnel, classified, certified. I did them in May and gathered that information. The second thing we did is we looked at our academic data. See, I think when you're on the list, the natural inclination sometimes for a leader is to put pressure on your faculty to data can be used as a weapon. But I wanted to make sure it was used as a tool. And so we diagnosed our data all the way down to the question student level, which was fair to the teachers. It's the first time they've done that. And we did that in our first days. The other thing is we aligned our areas of need with best practice. So those were my values coming in as a leader. And within a year, those 3-year averages turned to all A's. We were the highest performing school in the district with 1-year data impacting 3 years. I inherited a school that had an F in reading and value added and D in science. We worked together around those organizational goals that were established in the SWOT and around the achievement and growth goals. And then we applied best practice. So in 2006, 2007, I'm in my 4th year. We're always earning all A's. In fact, that first year we earned all A's, Franklin Special School District as a district had all A's, but we were the only school. So needless to say, we were off the list within a year. So every year, we came in stronger and stronger. Every quintile, every subgroup made their growth. So real strong impact with a dedicated group of teachers that just needed a focused leadership approach. So in 2006, 2007, I started exploring future leadership opportunities, but for me, the fit was more important than the position. So I researched a district in North Carolina that had an opening and called one of my principals when I was an AP, who was working in North Carolina, and asked about that district. Were they data driven? Were they based on best practice? Did they keep organizational data? That type of situation. And he said, you know, Sean, you remember Mike Harris? I said, yeah, Mike Harris was a principal at Bethesda and an HR director in Williams County when I was at Franklin Special. He had moved to North Carolina, became HR director, and then he had just gotten the job here. So that mentor of mine reached out to Mike Harris, and Mike Harris reached out to me and let me know he had a middle school director opening. Did I want to know more about the district? So I asked him questions, and he said, look, we're going to be presenting at the National Staff Development Conference in November of 2006. I was signed up to go anyway, so I went, and what I was exposed to was Dr. Husk, who was the exiting director of schools, with Mike Harris, with BJ Worthington, and with Bruce Joe, presenting with Stepsky. So I learned that this district was aligned with Stepsky, which was aligned with best practice, one of 8 to 9 urban districts throughout the United States that was dedicated to the fact that low socioeconomic status should not dictate achievement levels. Leadership should impact achievement levels. And they shared their organizational assessment that all 8 to 9 school districts took part in, and Clarksville had the highest level of organizational assessment. So I was intrigued, no doubt, to come to Clarksville, to apply for the job. Janine Johnson gave me a structured interview. I interviewed with Roz Evans. I interviewed with BJ Worthington and Bruce Joe, and ended up getting the job. So my attraction to Clarksville was based on a value and principle system that I wanted to make sure that I could work in a district that I would fit in.
Thank you.
Dr. Impeartrice, what do you consider to be your major strength in which you would bring to this position?
So I talked to you about leadership success, and when I talk about leadership success, I want to humbly say that no leader can be successful without the teachers and the classified staff or the staff that work with them. If you do not have effective staff, it doesn't matter what your leadership style is. So when I talk about that, understand I humbly talk about that, yes, I've been charged with leading some organizations and some departments, but nothing happens unless your people lead it. So all the way down, obviously, it's the most important spot in the classroom. So that history of leading successful organizations, I told you, our achievement and our growth scores were always A's. And they were A's 5 years after I left, so I felt good about the structures and processes that were in place when I left. And then here, I really think, well, in 2017, 2018, 43% of our schools were awards. Any district that had more than 12 schools, the next closest big district to ours was Williamson County, which had 35%, which reward schools are the top 5% in achievement, top 5% as well. Our department had a big emphasis in focusing on our work, and the schools performed, the leaders were wonderful at the schools, and the teachers worked hard, and we achieved that status. But I think most currently in my role, I think facilitating partnership-based strategic work is really important, and I make it a designation between partnership, or distinction between partnership and relationship. To me, partnership, you have to have a common goal. You have to have some type of mutual benefit that you're going to get, and you have to share the work, right? And so I'll point to Austin Peay State University, where I negotiated with Austin Peay to start the teacher residency pathway. We both had a common goal. They wanted to, in their report card, they wanted to increase the diversity of their educational candidates. We wanted to increase the diversity of our teachers. And so that was the common goal. The mutual benefit was they were recognized by a trust as earning an A in diversity 1 year after we started with them. And they recognized the teacher residency pathway as getting that designation. The other mutual benefit to Austin Peay was during COVID, when all other schools within Austin Peay were down in student population, they were up by 12%. And they were up by 12% because of the partnership we created with teacher residency pathway. Nashville State, same story. In fact, Nashville State Clarksville campus is the only Nashville State campus that's up in student population. It's based on our dual enrollment. It's also based on our teacher residency pathway. Lipscomb came to us. They certainly have benefited from that. Today, they signed the first degree apprentices in the United States. Remember, we did the non-degree apprentices with Austin Peay. Today, we signed Lipscomb up. So they're recognized as the first teacher occupational apprentices that are degreed in a 1-year program in the United States. TCAP has an overflowing waiting list with our partnership with Early Technical College. Workforce Essentials, one of the ways they're evaluated is in the number of apprenticeships that they have, apprentices they signed up. Since November, because of our work, they signed up over 120 apprentices. Tennessee Department of Education built a whole grant system for Grow Your Own based on our partnership, and DAS Austin P in Clarksville-Montgomery County to go around the state and show people how to replicate the work. State Collaborative on Reforming Education, SCORE. Bill Frist started that organization when he was looking to run for governor. It's a reform education organization, reaches out to us to be part of innovative work. We're in 4 or 5 districts. CMCSS and PET, I meet with them on a monthly basis, but I have an open door policy with them. And so it's not unusual for me to get a text from Constance or Kathy sometime during the week asking me to look into working conditions and things that are going on within the district. So I value that. In fact, when COVID hit, Miller House handed that communication over to me. And from March of 2020 till almost December of 2020, we were meeting on a weekly basis. I met with them to go over our plans and let them know what we're doing with COVID and give feedback.
Thank you.
Dr. Garris, how does your philosophy of education align with this district?
Well, my philosophy of education always started at Freedom Intermediate, where I read Douglas Reed's Leadership and Learning Matrix, and it's a 4-quadrant matrix, and basically, if you're lucky, you have high results, but you don't understand why. So replication is not likely. Losing is when you have low results and you do not know why. Leading is when you have high results and you know those antecedents, you know the data, you know the reason why. And learning is when you've got low results, but you have a high understanding of the antecedents. It really coincided with what I was taught as a special ed teacher. First-year special ed teacher is, you know, the 4 things that you work on every day in special ed is you diagnose, so you look at data, you prescribe, you build a plan, you intervene. If it's not working, you change it, and you build relationships. And I would change that now to build partnerships. So that is my leadership style.
Thank you.
If you're selected as director of schools, would you make Montgomery County your place of residence if it's not already?
Absolutely, of course. I'm already involved in the community. I do belong to the local Hillsdale Kiwanis. I am an advisory board member of Cornerstone Credit Union. And then I talked about the professional partnerships that I've been involved in Austin P, National State Community College, Workforce Essentials.
Dr. Harris, give us an example of when you've changed your mind and taken a different course of action as a result of listening to others, either professionally or personally.
So it was 2017 and 18 when Constance Brown walked into my office, because it was the first time we were faced with the teacher shortage. We were 30 teachers short in 2017. 18, we had heard about it, but we really were not predicting that we would be. And so she was discouraged about that, as I was. And she said, what are you going to do about this teacher shortage? And so I rolled out the early versions of the teacher residency pathway work that we were working on, that Phyllis Case Bolton had done a diversity innovation grant. It was one of the promising practices that we had learned from Fresno. And I said, this is our plan, but I'm still in negotiations with Austin P. I don't know if we're going to get there. We negotiated with another college too, just to try to get there. I said, but if we get there, the next question I asked, so what are you guys doing about the teacher shortage as an organization? And she says, what do you think? What do you have in mind? I said, just think, if we're short teachers, you're short members. The kids are the ones that suffer. This is a problem. Why don't we work towards a solution together? And she said, what do you have in mind? I said, well, I don't know about you, but if I'm in this program and if I know you paid for my textbook or a portion of my textbook, I would probably look at joining your association. I don't see any problem with that. I said, I'm not saying we're going to actively recruit, but I think it would show that partnership that we're working together. We can fund it, but that would be a wonderful partnership. So she says, well, I'd have to put it out with my executive board. Could you come talk to them about the work we're trying to do and see if they want to be involved in that partnership? So I did present to the executive board, and they later voted in favor. But what I did not think about, and what I did not anticipate, and what I wasn't even considering is, they said, this sounds interesting to us, and we will look at whether we contribute for textbooks or not, but we want to mentor and we want to tutor these residents. We want to make sure they're successful. So Margaret, remember when we presented at TSBA and you introduced us, after that presentation, how many people came up to us and said, I can't believe your local teacher association worked with the district to collaborate and solve a problem in unison. And so I wasn't anticipating that, and to this day, association members as well as PET members are part of that tutorial wraparound service piece. In fact, our liaisons that help out with the Lipscomb program that get a stipend for it, they were both part of that executive board. So the partnership continues, and we're very appreciative of that partnership.
In your administration, what avenues are open for you to listen to the concerns of employees, students, parents, and the community? How would you plan to have time available for all involved?
So what I want to show you is I'm not just preparing for an interview when I talk about listening. Okay, I told you about in 2003, the first thing I did was listen. I was appointed to a school that many perhaps did not even want me. Some of them applied for the school I was at, and I didn't select them. So the first thing I did was listen, and I told you, and this was that original SWOT in 2003. One thing that I want to point out is under the threat. Remember, the threat is what's something that you think impacts the culture of your school that you think you have no control over. The threat was uncertainty of grade configuration. The board, it recently built a new school, which I was running the middle school before I came over here to Freedom Intermediate. And once they looked at Freedom Intermediate and they were hearing from the community that it had a toxic culture, it was on the No Child Left Behind list. They set up a committee to look at grade configuration, because the easiest way to get out of that situation out in space is you could put the 5th graders with the K4 buildings, you could put the 6th graders with the middle school, and it was an old building anyway. It was the old junior high that needed to be renovated. So they were very threatened by that committee. And so we worked through a communication plan. If we can't get people in our building, how can they know what's going on in this building, both academically and through enrichments? And so we just started a postcard campaign with the mission statement on it, and a specific situation where a child had either academically performed or we had seen him have success in some enrichment. And with their lesson plans, the teachers sent those in to the 4th grade teachers of the schools they came from. I sent them to the principals, and everybody sent them to their parents. We had a board meeting in November where the board chair made a motion to disband the grade level configuration committee because of all the positive feedback they were getting about Freedom Intermediate School. So I think what it showed is when you're purposeful with your data, whether it's organizational or academic, you can accomplish what you think you cannot accomplish. In September of 2014, before our data came out and we were all A's, we had a major newspaper, Williamson AM, did a cover story on our school and the changes that had happened in the school. So I did the same thing when I came back as Chief Academic Officer. I did a swap with my instructional team, started out listening, and there were some concerns. There were some concerns about, in our instructional team meetings, communication, kind of calling late meetings up. not being engaged, not everybody engaged, siloing off of the work, finding out about the work kind of at the last minute. And so what we did is we totally redesigned that monthly meeting. And we started out with celebrations. Then we went to developing, updating, and sharing and collaborating our strategic work. It's transparent now where everybody can see everybody else's action plan. We do an activity at the beginning of the year where they have to get into everybody's action plan and kind of have a breakout session where they learn about each other so we don't silo and we don't replicate work that we should be integrating. And then we always do professional development around learning, but we do a book study, but they present the professional development. And so it's totally reshaped that committee, and it was all based on their feedback. So in your, also when we look at concerns of employees, students, parents, and community, of course we have stakeholder feedback groups where we get the trend data from, focus groups, the monthly meetings, and open door policy for CMCEA and PET. We have improvement teams, we have surveys, obviously the public feedback, the questions on the web, the board questions or concerns, questions on websites, email, and phone calls. And our communication department does a wonderful job of logging those and training those, and that goes into our work. I think if we've got trends in those areas, we need to be very actionable in our planning around that. And then, even though I come from inside the system, I think my approach needs to be in this position, the new position that I would occupy, as coming in as an outsider. And so doing what outsiders do when they come in and looking from a fresh eye and fresh ear, really getting learning community feedback. My 90-day entry plan, I want to have focus groups around the SWAT with parents and caregivers, students, schools, departments, special ed, 504 gifted, ELL, military connected, county mayor, the city mayor, faith-based leaders, and community organizations that support students and families within the organization. And then I would like to report those trends, just like that SWOT information, to the board and to the community, and then build actions around those areas that we can address immediately, but if we could not address it immediately, work it into the budget process.
Dr. Impeartrice, what have you done to help the public understand the needs and successes of your school system?
Board presentations is a big part of my job as the chief academic officer or my staff's job, focused on the strategic work. We play a part in Leadership Clarksville. There's always an education day. Leadership CMCSS, we certainly play a role in that. I presented probably 4 times to the Kiwanis. And because of our work around teacher residency pathways and apprenticeship, been a thought partner as well as Phyllis and her team for districts, educator providers, and workforce agencies across the nation. We have presented our work at the superintendent conference and consent groups. We've had local and national news interviews based on this work, and we've presented at national conferences.
Dr. Impeartrice, how would you measure your success as director of schools?
Similar to how I measure success as a principal, and I talked about that organizational data, that feedback data. What are we doing actionable about those trends? And then academic data, of course. Our strategic work, all departments have key performance indicators, and we definitely need to report those out to the board. I would do a cabinet 360 evaluation, so they could give honest and transparent feedback about my leadership and support for those departments. And then, of course, the board is going to have an evaluation, which I'm sure some of it will be based on what I've already talked about, but probably the 13 executive limitations, if there's evidence that we are providing you with the information that you want to know about the areas you have determined that you want that control over. The ends policy, which is largely around what our students leave this county with as they go to articulate into either college or career. And then that board staff linkage with the director being the employee of the board to ensure that those relationships are strong and ongoing and communication is strong. And that when you need specific information, you have it. You need to bring in a member of my staff to give it to you, that you get that in a timely manner to prepare you to either answer questions or for you to be able to answer questions on your behalf or concerns.
Dr. Impeartrice, since you've been in education as a teacher and administrator, how have you observed changes in student behaviors? And how would you plan to address student discipline to reduce disruptions in the classroom, as well as provide a safe environment for both staff and students?
So undoubtedly, behavior has increased even more during the COVID years. We were seeing an increase in mental health issues prior to COVID, and it's just exacerbated it. I'll tell you, my first job was in a private special ed school in San Jose, California, and I taught the high school. And school districts paid $28,000 33 years ago for students to be placed there. They were mostly Ward group home kids. And so I know I've experienced personally what some of our teachers are experiencing right now. I experienced it 33 years ago. We've got to continue to seek to understand how we can support our teachers at a greater capacity. I will say that as we approach the code of conduct this year, it was really important to do a code of conduct survey to the community as a whole, because I really believe, and we've said in our stakeholder groups before, the question's always been, how does this code of conduct represent the values and expectations of this community? So this code of conduct isn't just the board's approved code of conduct for EL 13. In my mind, the reason we wanted to survey is I really wanted it to be the community's expectations. Right? And so the survey allowed us to see their responses, and 40% of those responses were certified responses, and they told us quite frankly what they wanted to see. So fewer student infractions of a code before the office referral, especially on category 1 offenses that teachers were handling. So with what we presented to the board, we dealt with that. Stronger consequences for bullying, fighting, and assaults. We also made adjustments in that. And then this is a piece of work that we'll work with communication on, and I think it's very valid feedback. Teacher and parent understanding of the code was acknowledged, but the need for greater understanding of the code by the students was highly recommended. So we need to have an actionable communication plan to assist the schools to ensure that students understand that code to the greatest capacity possible. And then part of our strategic work focus that we're involved in for next year is around intervention. As a school system, we do pretty well with academic interventions we're used to dealing with. When we look at the data, we get it all the way down to the question level based on the subject. And then we have tools and supports we know to try to close those gaps. It's much more complex for behavior than the process is the same, right? And so we've put as a piece of strategic work this year to work with interventions, not just academically, but behavior. Make sure there are added supports and tools for teachers in the classroom, and then support when that doesn't work. And so that's part of our strategic work focus. And then the focus of this year's budget, based on feedback at the mid-year review and our instructional feedback, mid-year review from principals, our instructional team, between ESSER and this budget, we have 9 additional social workers in this budget, and they were very clearly asked for by the principals. And we have some additional counselors. We've increased staffing in alternative school. We added a high school teacher, we added a middle school teacher, we added an interventionist, and we added a social worker just for alternatives. I want to continue to partner with the community. The values and the expectations of the community were represented in the code of conduct of this survey. Continue to partner with law enforcement to support the values and expectations of this community regarding student behavior. I will tell you that in light of recent occurrences, I think these survey results would be a lot different. But this was based on the employee survey this year. 85% of employees feel their school is safe. Now, as the director of schools or chief academic officer, I won't rest until that's 100%. We want everybody to go to the building that's safe. And in a parent survey, 89% of families feel that their children are in the same school, and 60% of those families support social emotional learning in the area of helping students identify and regulate emotions. I will tell you, as we were presenting the budget to the principals, we always give them an opportunity to look at what was not funded, what was funded, and would they move something. And they work in clusters. And they identified an at-risk coordinator that could handle 504 at school, so it would alleviate the counselors from dealing with 504, which makes them more readily available to deal with mental health support. And they identified that that person could also be the expert in behavior in the school instead of outside the school coming to the school. So we don't have a budget right now to deal with that with every school, but we are looking at some existing positions we already have that serve some of those functions to redirect to some of our most needy schools that type of position, as well as starting to have conversations with some principals that have title budgets that may want to pilot it too. So I think your budget always needs to be fluid where it can be fluid. And BJ Worthington taught me the whole time, I thought that the principals would be very excited about the social workers because that's what they said they wanted in December. Always ask the next question, right? So they are excited about the social workers. But what they really wanted to convey is we need help in our classrooms. And we need help in our classrooms right now.
Dr. Impeartrice, this board's focus is on student achievement. If you were selected as director, what steps would you take to ensure academic excellence in the school system and recover from the learning loss due to COVID-19 disruptions?
So I should be Douglas Reeves, and we're either, what's only acceptable to us is to be either learning or reading. And in 2017-18, we were leading. We were well on our way, even though new standards were introduced, Tennessee 10 ready standards, academic standards in 2015-16. That's a whole new job description for a teacher, right? And we were well on our way to meeting those standards. Like I said, 43% of our schools were award schools, recognized as the top 5%, but then COVID hit, right? And we lost some students. We lost some student engagement. We lost some parent engagement. In lieu of some health and safety standards. And so we have a lot of unfinished learning, and I want to designate the difference between learning loss and unfinished learning. We have students that didn't get the opportunity to learn what they were supposed to learn. So they couldn't lose the learning. They were never taught the learning. So we're focused on that unfinished learning plan. Through SCORE, we're introduced to a research-based concept, high dosage tutoring, which is very skill-based within the school day or outside of the school day, where we really work with identified students that have some unfinished learning and learning gaps. We do that in all our elementary schools. We also do it in ELL and special ed after school hours. Parents have signed their kids up. So we're dealing with that unfinished learning plan. There's a focus plan for each school. So as we go over their formative academic data, that aligns with the 10 ready assessment, we can go all the way down to the question level. So when we do that, the level directors work with the principals work with their faculty and staff on working on what each grade level really needs to focus on to close those gaps. And so we're really focused in that approach in both achievement and growth data. And then we look at that formative data and the 10 ready data, the summative data. We look at it to see what trends do we have in the district. So maybe 7th grade math is really struggling, or Algebra 2 is really struggling. So we have what we call just-in-time trainings, where we bring teachers that teach throughout the district on our professional development days to look at best practice and the data in those areas. So we're very focused in our approach to looking at our academic data and providing the appropriate resources and supports and pedagogy and best practice to our teachers.
Thank you.
What plans do you implement to recruit and retain a quality, diverse, and talented group of teachers and employees?
Okay, so our teacher residency pathway, we get 16%, same as the state, of ethnically diverse candidates who are traditional recruit. Our last cohort, ETR, was 41%. So we've invested in the community. The community looks like the students. So we are continuing in that vein. What you may not know about is we have a leadership residency pathway too. So the state provided an aspiring assistant principal network grant, which pays for their Masters of Ed leadership at Austin Peay. And the state only requires for the candidate in their school to have one release period. What we do is we interview for those candidates, and we put them in some of our lower socioeconomic schools with excellent leadership, and we give them a release from their teaching position for a whole year. And they work on the job competencies and go to Austin Peay at night. So we're building leaders. And so as we look at that 41%, to be in that leadership residency program, it takes 5 years of teaching. As our residents start becoming fifth-year teachers, we're going to have a systemic approach to build our leaders to more represent our community too. And then we have a teacher pre-apprenticeship program going on at our Teaching and Learning Academy at West Creek High School. And so in their junior and senior year now, they're taking dual enrollment classes at Nashville State towards their associate degree in teaching, and some of those will join our teacher body. We have a diesel apprenticeship that will start with the opening of Kirkwood, and they will apprentice in our own operations department. So Kirkwood will be a transportation academy. They will offer diesel. There will be a bay there that they can use as a lab and work. And during their junior and senior year, they can intern, and then they can get an apprenticeship. Desktop support apprenticeship. In our Academy for Northeast, we partnered with Nashville State, and it's going to kick off next year. So desktop support is about 60% of the technology personnel we hire. But we do a lot of desktop support, and sometimes the needs outweigh what we're able to do. So this apprenticeship program and degree program that Nashville State created just for us also provides opportunities for them to explore programming and networking in case they want to move beyond desktop support. But they'll be able to re-image our computers in the summer. But right now we're using personnel to do that. They'll be able to work in our schools and provide desktop support and support to our teachers. So that's going to be run out of Northeast next year, and it's with the partnership of Nashville State. We definitely want to support HR's diversity mentoring plan. Michael Tharp has met with us as a team. We're fully supportive. We communicated that out to the principals and look forward to the progress. And then as far as retention goes, what we do know about TISA next year is it looks like we're going to have an opportunity to really hit competitive salary and benefits for certified classified employees next year. And I hope what we're being told right now in our initial projections end up coming true, because that needs to be the emphasis, no doubt. And then addressing safe working and learning environment. Like I said, I think that's the theme of what you're hearing, is the theme of what I'm hearing. We did, through our health and safety, conduct audits in all middle schools and high school around hallway behavior, around safety, and provided next step recommendations. And we'll continue to seek ways to ensure that our teachers and our classified staff have a safe working environment. We're collaborating on working conditions with collaborative conferencing. So We started this work earlier this year, and so understanding the teachers on collaborative conferencing have surveyed teachers, but they've also heard from teachers as well as our questions, our monthly questions from our teacher advisory group. You can see that the challenges that we talked about earlier are there, whether around safety, whether around workforce shortage, so they're strapped, covering classes. So they're tired, they're exhausted. We need to be able to provide some kind of relief. So we started asking, okay, what can we take off teachers' plates? And so we started having that dialogue in November. It was right around mid-year review. So they gave us some ideas. The first idea was the whole lesson plan piece. There are some teachers out there doing extensive time with lesson plans in the hopes of satisfying the evaluation process. So we clarified with principals, and I'm not saying it's happening everywhere, I'm not saying the principals dictated that. Sometimes a teacher will read that rubric and want to make sure they get a 5 and do that, but in any case it was happening, right? And so we clarified the expectations that it does not need to be an extensive lesson plan. In fact, a lesson plan over 10, 11 pages is excessive. And so we have said that to principals, level directors, talked with them in their groups. I think we still have some work to do to roll that out even stronger. And then they talked about our new ELA curriculum and how much ELA teachers even need to bring to collaborative planning. That question stands that they really need to bring. So in addition to their individual planning, they were doing extra work for collaborative planning. So the academic coaches gave us that feedback too. So Emily got to work with the curriculum team, and we just rolled out those question stems at grade levels to assist them with that. Now what we've charged the teachers in collaborative conferencing with, they've done some surveying, they've heard the trends, is that they could come up with 4 areas of working condition. With the overwhelming thing is what can we take off teachers' plates? Then let's put it in our strategic work. Let's make it part of our monthly principal questions. Let's put it in our learning records. Let's streamline it like we do with any other strategic work throughout this district. So on the 10th, they're going to be coming back to collaborative conferencing and give us those areas that they want us to focus on, and we're going to focus on it together. I think another piece of angst that's come, over 20 years, we've done parenting, our teacher advisory the same way. Similar questions are asked and similar questions are responded to. And I think it's become tiresome, to be honest. I think it's tiresome for the administrators that are trying to give a district perspective when teachers are wanting to know what's going on in the school and we're not there. And then it's tiresome for the teachers because they just want something actionable. They want to change, right? And so I think we've recognized in that collaborative conferencing that it's not working. And so we want to work together and answer those questions together. And like I said, pick those 4 areas. So we'll arrange our meetings that come along with the teacher advisory. So we're collaborative in our approach. Their perception is so important as to how we're responding to the teacher's concerns. So really excited about that collaboration and work. It's the right work that needs to happen. And then the last piece I'll go into more later, but I'm on a national group that's dealing with best practice around teacher retention. So it's the American Association of Education Employers. And in that group, I'm exposed to best practice. And at the same time, I was getting exposed to this program called Upbeat, which I think you guys have received some information about, but I'll elaborate more. It's an employee retention program. So was Melissa Isaac had been exposed in HR the same. So we got together and started meeting with Upbeat, and we put it in the budget, and I'll explain more details later, but that's also a piece that we're working on for retention.
Dr. Impeartrice, in the current high-pressure environment for teachers, how will you relieve some of the pressure so that they can do their jobs more effectively?
Yeah, so I talked about the collaborative conferencing focus on teaching working conditions and those 4 areas, and then we will align that work with strategic work, and then we are going to be realigning that teacher communication and feedback process to be more effective. I also hope as we do our listening tour, as director of schools, and other themes emerge, not only will we report them back to you and make actionable plans, but if there's something we can do right away within the budget that we have, within the resources we have, just like we did with what can we take off the teacher's plate, we'll do it. We won't wait for the report to come, investigate it and see what we can do. We know they're stressed, we know they're tired, we know the challenges are unlike any other time in education. And so we do want to support them to the highest degree possible.
Our student body is different now than pre-COVID-19. Students and teachers have different needs. What will you do to create an atmosphere in schools that will lead to educational excellence and a positive experience while being mindful of and addressing these changing needs for students and staff?
So I'll talk to you about the way we diagnose and analyze data for achievement and growth data. And we can go all the way down to the questions now, right? Well, with this upbeat, we can do the same thing with the research-based practices that are aligned with teacher and employee retention. So the way it would work is in October, there are a third party. Our teachers and employees at the school level would get a survey related to school leadership, teacher development practices and resources, teacher hiring and career development, and personal and organizational purpose. And you see the categories underneath there. There are questions specifically related to those categories. Once we get that data back, it'll go to the school and the district. And the impressive thing about Upbeat is it also provides a toolkit for schools to address the weak areas, and it provides coaching. So these are administrators that were highly effective in building culture in schools. So they provide coaching and a toolkit, and then we can then design professional learning around the areas that are popping at the district level. So how we address academics, we can start to address teacher retention. That's exciting to me to be able to have that type of data. At this point, we're not using it at all as an evaluative nature of a school. It's not data to do anything but to learn from and know that we cannot sacrifice any employee or teacher that's motivated to work for us. And if we're weak in some of these practices, then let's use the data as a tool to get better at these practices. We all have strengths and weaknesses in our leadership styles, but I do know, I've seen it as I've supervised principals, the impact a principal has on the learning community culture is immense. And we need to make sure that they've got the tools and the information necessary to do the best job that they can. And that the teachers feel free through a third party to conduct a survey. The survey comes back to the district in an aggregate way and by school, but not by personnel. And then I talked about our collaborative competency working condition focus. I also say for student needs, the parent survey was pretty clear that embedded in our instruction, they believe as students have gone through COVID and as mental health has become a bigger issue, that students definitely need help understanding their own emotions and how their emotions can influence actions. The ability to regulate and control their emotions, their thoughts and their behaviors. Making positive connections with peers and adults. If you look at the CDC data related to students in COVID or APA, what you'll see is a dramatic difference between students that were engaged with an adult at the school and those that were not. Now, we've always known that, right? Adult engagement with students is important, but it's even more vital and important to students right now feeling part of that community and not rejecting that community. Making safe and positive decisions and understanding others' perspectives and treating others fairly. And then in our ESSER budget, communication, put some parent engagement money in there. And we had a major grant, probably 6-7 years ago, that came through communication. And it actually put resources out in schools to update the website and to really try to engage parents. And I think over time it waned and it didn't sustain. And I think one of the problems is it ended up being siloed work, and that communication was driving the work and instruction wasn't driving the work. And so as I talked to Anthony Johnson this time, I said, let's revisit that research and that support, because we've got to engage our parents in meaningful ways around improving student achievement. But let's do it together. Let's do it as an instruction department and communication. And so we're re-looking at research that we've already vetted. One of those pieces is family-friendly schools. The other is community schools, and we're merging those to make one rubric. And we're identifying some pilot schools, some willing schools to take part in this work, to grow their own school in the effective research base of parent engagement, what that looks like at your school, evaluate it, self-evaluate it, develop plans for it, and audit it. It's not an outside auditing piece, it's an inside. But I think the biggest difference too, and we learned this from Houston, who does this work, is that we want to embed training for those groups of parents that are engaged in the work, administrators, teachers, and community members. Whoever they select as their group that's going to engage in that work. What we learned, there's a piece of research out there called dual capacity theory. And what it basically states is that the educators have a real good idea of what kind of support they want from parents. Parents have a real good idea of what they want from schools, but they don't always align. They're different perspectives. And what that dual capacity theory does is expose that. And let's come together around shared goals, around what parent engagement can look like at its highest level to influence student achievement. So it's very important. This pilot work is very important. And then communication is already auditing schools just for some toolbox work around making sure our websites are up to date, we have welcoming school environments, that type of situation. As the health and safety standards have diminished and we're getting people back into school, let's get them back into school in a positive way, in a research-based way, in a way in which they're setting goals for their own school and moving forward.
Dr. Impeartrice, how will you ensure students, staff, volunteers, the community, and the school board members are engaged in the development and implementation of your long-range goals and strategies for the school system?
So I talked to you about that 90-day plan and making sure that we are seeking input around what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, areas for growth, what are unique opportunities we're not taking advantage of, and then what do people see as threats of the school system, where things they feel they can't control but impact their relationship with the school system. So that's in addition to our stakeholder feedback groups, I want to present that data through focus groups, our usual surveys, employee survey, parent survey, public feedback. We've got public input here, and there are many times we're hearing things in public input that we may not want to hear sometimes, to be honest, but there's some truth here. And so we've got to then look at that and see where we need to move forward as a district. And so board retreat, I'll always go over the strategic work at the board retreat to get the board's perspective. That is one of their ELs, this is strategic work. So we'll make sure that we've got feedback at the retreat as well as every day. Then cabinet retreat with our direct reports is where we flesh out that strategic work and all that stakeholder feedback. And then as far as demonstrating, I mean, you can ask for feedback all you want. What I found is when I did that first SWOT in 2003 for the intermediate school, the first day they came back to school, we shared what we were able to do and then develop plans for the rest. If you ask people for that data and you don't act on it, then they won't give you the data, right? And so through board presentations, monthly principal visits, the monthly principal visits are very important in this district because we are monitoring our strategic work and how it's rolling out at the school and what it looks like in the classroom, but there's a dual purpose there. That quality assurance goes from the school to the district as well as the district to the school. So if there are additional resources that are needed or support that's needed to implement that work at a particular school, or we're seeing themes that we need to provide some just-in-time training or some individual support to that school. The mid-year review that we do on a yearly basis and we report out on, the end of the year review. And then I also think we had a third-party Harwood Institute for Public Innovation report. And these are things that they identified that the community said that they wanted the school district to work with in conjunction with them, engaging parents and students. We talked about that. More things for young people to do after school other than sports. Strengthen mental health and mentorship support. We've heard some of these themes. Expand pre-K offerings. Hire more teachers who look like the community. And then ensure equitable resource allocation across all schools and areas. So I do believe that we need to pay attention to this report. And talking to Richard Harwood, he's had conversations with me and Anthony Johnson and Angela Huff and sent me an email. Part of this work is to set up innovation groups of representative of the community to solve some of these areas that the community has identified that are not just the school district's responsibility, they're the responsibility as a community as a whole. And I would like to partner with the community like we partnered with other organizations within this community and ensure that those 7 areas that were identified in the third-party survey are addressed. I also see that, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry, next question.
Okay. Impeartrice. CMCSS has always been a leader in education and innovation. In the state of Tennessee, what is your vision to continue that leadership role?
So, when I came on board in 2017, 18 as Chief Academic Officer, Millard House hired me, but he hired me as an interim. And I said, I really don't care what you call me. It was going to give me till the end of the year to see if it worked out. I really don't care what you call me, but if you want me just to keep it between the lines, that's not me. And he said, no, quite the contrary. 60 to 70% of your work needs to be spent on innovation. And from that day it has. And so we have a list that's on the PowerPoint of all the innovation that's happened under my leadership of instruction, but with a very strong instruction department, very strong teachers and principals and classified staff that have been involved in this work. So again, very humbled by the work that is going on. And other departments have contributed too. And I'll talk about a number of these others in some of my other questions, but I'll highlight some you may not be as aware of. We do have green power at Kenwood Middle School, and those are solar powered cars that the kids race. And we got that idea from a school district in Alabama. We actually compete. One is not coded in that it very much supports the STEM Academy. Expansions of programs of study, that's even going to be more important as we look at the governor's budget for CTE that has passed. CMCSS K-12 virtual, 3 years ago, that was 166 students and wasn't a school of its own. Now it's over 1,000, it has its own school number. And then establishing Greater Together. You may not know as much about Greater Together. So Greater Together is a partnership between Nashville State, Austin Peay, TCAT, Tennessee Achieves, and SCORE, and Clarksville-Montgomery County School System. And its basic emphasis is to identify students on their matriculation path after graduation. So whether it's career or whether it's college. And so we've been in that partnership for about a year. Nashville has a partnership with just Tennessee State. We have a partnership with all of our higher ed partners and career partners. And so just to share some data, in a year, we've had a 6% increase of students filling out the FAFSA. We have 191 seniors going to summer bridge program at Nashville State. And summer bridge program is a lot of people sign up for Nashville State kids, but then they decide not to go over the summer. That keeps them engaged with the college. And we have 210 seniors at Austin Peay's Governor Bridge program. We have 87% of our students for the first year had a senior survey where they indicated what they wanted to do past high school graduation. And so 481 of them showed up to a career where they could get immediate jobs. And then the others, because they filled out those surveys, we saw 50 kids that wanted to go to Nashville State that hadn't applied yet, and we made sure they applied. So we're using data for that post-secondary articulation to ensure that the kids in this community, which is rich with opportunities, have the opportunity to go where they want to go after high school. Our next steps, we're looking at the Transportation Academy at at Kirkwood. Pathway and apprenticeships I talked about for desktop support. I talked about the degree residency program. We are going to expand Spanish immersion to middle school. Expansion of these greater together goals I just talked about. Expansion of our CTE programs of study. And then the strategic work about implementing best practice to use to address academic deficits to support behavior needs in schools. And then strategic staffing to support school needs. I brought up the at-risk coordinator piece that we're going to work with some existing resources to look towards the budget next year to take advantage of the pilot schools that participate.
Dr. Impeartrice, the CMCSS board operates under policy governance. What is your experience with policy governance, and how comfortable are you operating in the policy governance system?
So I've worked at the senior level of this district for 15 years. So I've been very involved in the components of policy governance, excuse me. So the board in policy governance really focuses on the strategic leadership rather than the administrative detail of the district. So let me give you an example of a benefit of policy governance. We had an unfortunate incident at one of our schools recently. And because of that incident, we quickly, our general counsel researched and created a visitor policy that would clearly delineate for principals and school leaders what the and parents and community members, what the expectations for visitors of our school around behavior would be, and what the consequences would be if it did not happen. In a traditional board arrangement, that would have been drafted, would have had to have a first reading, would have had to have a second reading. You're probably looking at 3 to 4 months to implement that administrative policy. But we can sign off on that administrative policy on Monday because this board allows us that work. Now, this board also defines the work that they're going to allow the director of schools to direct staff to do. And that can change at any point. And right now there's 13 executive limitations that we report back to you on every board meeting. And during board retreats can be evaluated and looked at and determined, where the future is in that. The ENS policies are largely related to the experiences that we want our schools to articulate to the next level with. The executive limitations I've already described, and in that board staff linkage, whether it's policy governance or not, the one employee of the board is director of schools. And that as the board needs information about something specific, the director of schools definitely can meet with the board, with staff, and does that on a regular basis. But that board staff linkage is an important part of it. But most of all, this requires trust it requires ongoing and timely and effective communication between the directors of school and the board, if this is to work. And it has worked, in my opinion, for a number of years. It helped turn this district around, but you can never take for granted the transparency and the trust that's involved in this process.
Dr. Impeartrice, tell us about your most important decision you've made in your last current position, and how did you involve the people who would be affected by that decision?
So I had been interim chief academic officer for a couple days and going to my first SLT meeting, and right before I go to the meeting, Miller House says, "Hey, Sean, I want you to look at starting an immersion program." I said, "Okay." And before I could tell my instructional staff that we were going to be looking at an immersion program and researching it and reporting back, he says it to the whole SLT too. And so, needless to say, when I got to the instructional team, they had some opinions about starting a Spanish immersion program, and they were valid concerns. See, we were just entering into early learning, and in the 26 years I've been in Tennessee education, the biggest curriculum jump has been that K-2 curriculum jump. It's huge. If you have grandkids or you have kids at that age, you know what they're learning is totally different than what you learned at that age. It's very accelerated. And so there was a lot of effort being put into developing the curriculum to match those standards of early learning. And my level directors and curriculum director wanted that to be the focus and felt that, Spanish immersion could be nice, but we've got a lot of work to do around getting up to speed with early learning. So what I told him was, look, what Mr. House has asked us to do is research and vet this. We've done this a number of times. We've done innovation before, we know how to do it. We're going to do that. And if we research and vet it, and we look at best practice, and we visit schools out there, and you walk away and you still think with what we've got on our plate with early learning, this is not a good year to do this, I will go to Miller House and say, look, this is what we think about this innovation right now. We may have to put a pause on it and wait until we can clear it to the early learning. So Kimmy Saharsky, it's wonderful. We're getting research, the research, and continue research. We researched it. Miller had implemented this in Tulsa Public Schools, so we talked to the point person there. And it wasn't more promising because they talked about the hardest lift was the curriculum bill for an immersion program. And so looking at all that research, and I'm thinking, I am beating my head against the wall here because I'm an interim, and I certainly want to honor what our director wants, but we can do what we can do, right? And so I just did a Google search around Spanish immersion and Tennessee schools, and what came up was St. Peter's School in Chattanooga. And in this Episcopal magazine article, they talked about Adelingo, which was a curriculum support for immersion. So nowhere in the research did we find it. We found it. So we quickly got the team up to see St. Peter's. And so they had the materials. They had the early learning materials. They had a dual pathway where some were learning English and others were learning Spanish in different classrooms. And to see Emily Vaughn's face light up when she saw those materials, it's a child can do this. They're aligned exactly with what we're doing with early learning. And to see those young students speaking Spanish fluently with native speakers. So at that point, then we had to get principal buy-in. We did that at Clarksville, and then parent buy-in. We brought in Adelingo. Started out with 2 classes. Now we're in 3 classes at every grade level. It's hugely successful and a wonderful innovation that if I wouldn't have worked with the people and continued, for us to continue to research it, probably wouldn't have happened.
How would you make certain the public knows and supports what's happening in our schools?
And I think we've covered a lot of this, but presenting strategic work to the board, civic organizations, stakeholder groups, economic development council, Industrial Development Board, Leadership Clarksville, Leadership CMCSS, and then, like I said before, respond to feedback trends with actionable work. I think that says a lot about gaining support.
Have you been successful in getting strong parental and community support for a school, program, or district? Tell us about one of such successes.
So as far as the program goes, the teacher residency pathway, we certainly got easy to get parental support from graduated high school seniors when you offer to pay for their education and provide a job for their kid. That wasn't a tough piece. Community has supported the work immensely. In fact, most of our candidates are referred. Some are referred by board members, some are referred by county commissions. This work couldn't have happened without the initial funding that came right out of the GP budget. And we fund a lot of it differently since the first year, but that funding still comes out of the GP budget, which the Board of Education supported and the county commission did. Again, Austin Peay State University got on board and is definitely reaped the benefits as we have. CMCEA as a partner. We have a research partnership with Abbott. All we pay for is materials. So Sandy Huss, we called Sandy Huss, we called her and said, look, I think that wraparound support is essential, and added structures of focused note-taking, structured writing, critical reading are vital to the success of our students. I don't really want to pay any money. I'll pay you for materials if you'll come out and train our tutors for wraparound support, and we'll do a research study on it, which will acknowledge Abbott, which you agree. Lipscomb University came on board. When they heard about our work, we didn't recruit them, they came to us. Nashville State Community College, of course, Workforce Essentials, I'm talking about that. Tennessee Department of Education replicated our work, a lot of our work, and offered grants. There was one district and one higher ed institution in Austin Peay involved in this work 4 years ago. There are 14 higher ed institutions and 64 districts involved in the work today. School districts and higher ed institutions seek our information and our support. The U.S. Department of Labor accepted the apprenticeship application, first one in the United States. The State Board of Education worked with Austin Peay to relax their rules around praxis 1 for our residents, so they changed their work. And then U.S. Department of Education, the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, in March issued a call to action for all school districts and higher ed institutions to partner together and apply for the recognized apprenticeship, teacher occupational apprenticeship to help fund Bring the Drum.
Explain how you would develop a school system budget and tell us who you would involve and how you would involve them.
So, yes, been involved in the educational part of the school budget for years, and obviously as part of cabinet, been involved in the whole budget process. So the annual budget is based on the research needed to support the mission, vision, and strategic work of the district. The cabinet and direct reports retreat is important to establishing that work. We have in the past also always looked at our stakeholder feedback and examined a publication called Knowledge Works, which looks not only at educational trends for the future, but also trends in society. Then we develop that strategic work, share it with the board, and the board makes any adjustments that they need to it. And then we prioritize our needs in each department. And in the education department, I've always asked Leanne Parr, my administrative assistant, has always gone through the budget. And wherever we understand in the budget, we do that budget fresh every year. Is this budget aligned with this year's strategic work? If it's not, then let's cut where we need to cut, be fiscal stewards, or redirect money to where it needs to be redirected. And we do that on an annual basis, and then we evaluate our budget priorities, and we would in every department based on our day-to-day work and fulfilling the strategic work. Once that's been produced, Obviously, the projection of new fiscal year revenue and expenditures, Chris does a wonderful job of that. Just like this year, we would offer the opportunity for one-to-one meetings with board members to greater understand the budget. Eventually present the budget to the budget committee of the county commission and seek full county commission approval and post it on the website.
Dr. Impeartrice, our board is dependent upon the county commission to fund the budget. How would you propose to gain their support of the budget?
Well, I think it's real important for this position in the county mayor to have regular meetings. And again, I'll talk about the difference between relationship and partnership. I think those are partnership developing opportunities. The county commission funds the budget, and the fiscal agent, get that, I appreciate that. And they have needs. They have needs across this county. So whatever we submit to them, like I said, we need to be faithful stewards of what we do, and this board approves the budget. So the better the partnership with the county mayor, between the director of schools and the county mayor, the more likely to get a positive budget result. So that's work that I think a new director is going to need to do, and I'd be committed to doing that work. Work on developing a relationship and partnership with county mayor and the county commissioners. Provide any and all information to the county mayor needed to be informed about the proposed budget. Want them to be well equipped to answer the questions that are coming their way. And demonstrate that we are faithful and transparent stewards of the recent sources funded by the county commission. I think one of the most impactful things that I ever saw DJ Worthington do is we had a list of capital projects that we were not able to fully develop the year before. And he went into the mayor and said, look, go ahead and cut our capital projects budget for this year because we can't get on that work. And I think that transparency is important, right? That's a year-to-year budget. And if we see areas where we can do that, great. At the same time, part of this job is to advocate to meet the needs of the strategic work and to the benefit of this organization, the teachers, and most of all, the student learning in this county. So don't shy away from that either. But I think that's a two-edged sword. I think to do one, you've got to do the other.
Dr. Impeartrice, high-performing students and accountability are priorities for our schools. How will you assess the director's current level of performance, program effectiveness, and teacher effectiveness?
So I told you in 2017, 2018, we were leading. We're now learning, okay? We are in that learning mode. Our strengths are our graduation rate, our college career readiness, and the data that I shared with you. And we do a good job of growing diverse teachers. Our challenges, as the parent survey indicated, is some of those SEL needs in the buildings. And when I talk about those needs, when we talk about resources and support, if teachers are going to be involved in that, that needs to be involved in a way that we present them with materials that can be embedded into the work that they're doing, not separate from. And then counselors take on those skills that are more called for with their level of expertise. I would say ELA and math proficiency are challenges right now. We have unfinished learning in those areas. But I think through focused intervention, and I've talked about our data analysis and our plans at every level, and professional learning, we are going to be back. We have a history of this. We know how to do this work. Now, that doesn't make it easy for any child that's experienced unfinished learning. So I'm not minimizing the urgency of this. We have to be urgent. But we know how to do this work. We know how to do it well, and we will do it well. And then I really think we need to look at workforce shortages. I'm not sure, especially when it comes to bus driver shortages. I think operations and human resources done a wonderful job of exploring what they can explore to attract bus drivers. I think we can get a working group together that can leverage community members that have influence, that may be able to help us with an idea around how to address this shortage, much like we did with teacher residency. Let's involve the leverage points of this community and see if there's a way that they can help us solve this problem. Because I'm not It's not acceptable to me of a developing norm where kids come late to school and arrive late at home. And in this community, it's important to me that I have to be able to look in the mirror and say, we try to do everything we could to address this problem. And we look outside the box, we look at our community resources. I think it's essential, and it's something that I would establish right away to get to work on, as well as working on the issues that they face around behavior and the challenges they face.
Dr. Impeartrice, give some specific examples of actions you've taken as a teacher or administrator that you think contributed to making your faculty and staff an effective team. And how did you build support for that change even in the face of opposition?
So I do believe that the processes the instructional team has in place leads to the support of an effective team. And one of the most important pieces, we did a book study in the instructional team on the culture solution. And what the research says is 1% of organizations have clarified their values. And of those 1%, that's 765% of profit in the United States, and that's from Fortune 500 companies. And so we got to work on creating our operating principles and working agreements. These are the principles that guide our work and to guide our interactions with each other. And so we define the service. Central office really only exists to serve the schools. If you're not serving the schools, what are we doing? And so there's some level of service to the schools in everything we do. Unity, that as an education department, we need to be unified in our approach to providing support to those schools. We don't need to be picking at each other. Those schools need us. They need to see an example at this level that we're healthy in our relationships and we're unified around our strategic work in supporting those schools. And then a growth mindset, that we're always looking to support our schools, our teachers with best practice to get the maximum results out of the efforts that they give on a daily basis. And then I think you have to have defined autonomy. You can't micromanage a team. They all have strategic work to do. Hold them accountable for that strategic work and let them do it and monitor, but let them do their job. Now, with weekly meetings that are focused on executing our work, we challenge ideas, and that's part of our unity, not people. But Stepsky taught us in the organization that you push back on ideas, because when you push back hard on ideas, you get a better solution. Monthly school visits, questions that align with the work from the level of directors. They provide support to the schools. They bring that up to our team when things are not working. We need greater support.
Dr. Impeartrice, explain what you've done to build and maintain a good relationship with your board and our administrative staff.
Well, I'll talk about my administrative staff. I do feel like I have a good relationship with the board, but that wasn't my role. So communication, really important to ensure that the work that we're working on and how we're trying to support the schools and everybody understands the why. Why are we doing this? Because when you're part of the instructional team and you meet somebody in the grocery store and they say something about what's going on and you've never been exposed to it, then you can't educate, right? And so part of our instructional team is always making sure that we understand why we're doing what we're doing, what the purpose of it is, and what we hope to accomplish, but also what are you hearing? What are you hearing in the community? Because you need to be equipped. Is there something that we're discussing in SLT that you don't know about, that you've heard secondhand? Let's give you the first-hand event so that you can speak to it. I think with my administrative staff, it's really important to share that leadership, like I said, that defined autonomy. People that are high flyers in my administrative staff, every one of those level directors and curriculum directors were level 5 principal. Turnaround schools are level 5 principal. These are high flying individuals. They know how to run a school. They know how to run a highly effective school. But if you try to micromanage somebody that does high flying, you're not gonna motivate them. They're gonna feel discouraged. So always monitor, always check in, let's talk about what's going on. Let's bounce things off each other. But you need to share that leadership. Focus on the work. The work is the focus. Don't get distracted from the work. The reason that we've been able to innovate in this district is because we have not let go of the focus. Monitor the work. If we're going to focus on it, monitor it. And monitor it all the way down to the school level, because that's where it's being implemented. That's where they need support. We may have schools that are being asked to develop work or innovate work that they don't have the skills to do, that we need to teach them the skills to do. So that monitoring is very important. And then intervene with the work. If the work is not, if it's not productive and it's not working, then let's do something different. Okay, let's change it up. Let's not be so tied to what's in our action plan that it's not a fluid document. People are more important than the planner giving them the skills and the resources to do their job are highly more important than checking off the box that I did that action step in action.
Thank you.
How would you work with your board to be effective, make good decisions, and be respected as a board by the community?
Well, I think communication, like I said earlier, is really important. It would be my role to keep you informed. You know, I don't think things that you need to know. I've always told them, do not withhold information from me that's important for me to do my job, right? And your elected officials that are seen in the community as the governance of this district, and you need to be informed. You need to be informed. Listen to the feedback. If there's trends involved in that feedback, if we can't address it this year through our strategic work, then we put it on a list where we address it at some point. Be transparent. No organization is perfect. The director of schools isn't perfect. The staff isn't perfect. If for some reason you're hearing something and it's not best practice and we didn't handle it correctly, then it's incumbent upon the director of schools to be transparent with you about what's actually going on and how we're going to correct it. Do not withhold information that's important. And the only thing that, in my opinion, that I have as a leader is my integrity and my reputation. And I'm certainly not going to sacrifice that because I would want to tell a board member something I think they may want to hear. I've got to tell the board member the truth and what's going on. And I think that's fair to you, and I think that's fair to the organization. Schedule meetings with individual board members on a regular basis. Present evidence of progress of strategic works and policy and executive limitations. Make sure that we have a structured board retreat with shared agenda. And then provide access to the board for professional training. I know that you all have a certain amount of training that you need to take part of in TSBA, and then we have a chief of staff that also does some new board training. So make sure that you have access to what you need to be an effective board.
Right on time. Thank you, Dr. Impeartrice, for applying for the position of Director of Schools. I just wanted to complete our final interview. We'll be in a brief recess and then we'll open it up for the employee and staff to ask questions to Dr. Impeartrice.